1801. It's traditionally called the Tripolitian War because it refers to the Barbary states in North Africa. And we've got a map in the classroom that is dating to World War I, but you get the general idea there. There are several countries going from the west to the east, which are Morocco, Algiers, Tunisia, Tunis back then, Tunisia now, and Tripoli, which is Libya. And then, of course, you have Egypt. So going from the west to the east across that way, you have those several countries. Most of those countries had treaties with the United States, and they were also nominally under the control of the Ottoman Empire out of Turkey, although they flexed their muscle and showed their independence throughout the previous centuries. They are also followers of Islam. So there is also the religious difference between other countries of Europe and the United States. At one point, when Washington and Adams were president, we paid a sixth of the budget for tribute, or basically bribes. That shocked me. That should shock everybody. That one of every $6 of the United States budget, went to basically paying them off so that they would leave our commerce alone. And the Barbary pirates did that to other nations, unless you had the power to, by force, sign a treaty with them, which Jefferson considers doing after 1801. So Washington and Adams figured out we have no navy and we should just follow along what other European countries did. Pay the bribe, and if you don't pay the bribe, that's the other thing they did. In this case, it was Tripoli. Tripoli decided to seize American commerce ships, not warships, but trading ships. I mean, we were entering the Mediterranean after the American Revolution because, you know, we're not colonies of Great Britain. And though the risk was there, we can trade with whatever part of the world we wanted to. And that would include areas of Spain and Italy and the Eastern Mediterranean. So it made sense. But when you entered that part of the world, you were sometimes subject to attacks from the Tripoli pirates or the Barbary pirates as a group. So you pay off some nations and say that you will leave our ships alone flying the American flag. We will continue to pay the bribes. But the treaties to Barbary pirates, to this group, is only temporary, and everybody knew it. You know, they can very quickly say the sum is going to get higher, the bribe is going to be more, and then once they stopped and commandeered American and European commerce ships, the other thing that happened is that they would hold their crews hostage. They would throw them in a North African jail, by which the government or the families of those who were involved would have to raise funds and pay the bribe, the ransom, essentially, to get those folks out of there. And that's exactly what Tripoli did, Tripoli individually, out of all the Barbary pirates after 1801. They technically declared war on the United States. And Jefferson decides that paying the bribe is an insult, and also our small Navy. The Navy had gotten some valuable experience in the quasi-war with France, 1797 to 1800. Not so much fighting the French, but at least outfitting several, not many, several frontline state-of-the-art ships, okay? Built in New England and then sent around the world to protect American commerce. So he decides to, Jefferson's words, suppress their insolencies of the Barbary pirates by using force to make the old treaties basically bind to the nation, in this case, the nation of Tripoli. So let's take a look here.
The pirates originally came out of the Ottoman Empire, but they stretched North Africa to lose, like you're saying?
Sorry, say again?
The pirates, they're originally from the Ottoman Empire, but they're also North Africa as well.
Right. They are technically and under the
Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, not the command, but they are supposedly take their orders and are part of. They are tributary states, I think is the right word to use, of the Ottoman Empire out of Turkey, but they act independently on their own. When you have individual leaders who can change policies, or the Pasha or Yusuf is the Pasha Yusuf in this case, and Tripoli decides, well, you know, maybe we can shake down the government for more, and he's successful at doing that. Okay, so where are we talking about here? Ah, good. Here's a good map. Okay. All right, let me go backwards here. I don't know if it's sharing. There it is, the Barbary raids. This is a good map. You can see that their sphere of influence extends out north from those states that I mentioned, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Tripoli, and Egypt. Okay, so we'll use that map because it's part of this story. So in 1803, Jefferson sends a new commander to the Mediterranean, Commodore Edward Preble, to literally shiver the timbers of those Barbary states as an example, but specifically to Tripoli, which is now, of course, Libya. And it was largely unsuccessful. We tried to basically blockade the port there, a major port in Tripoli. We tried to bombard it. We tried to stop the raiders from coming in and out, and it was largely unsuccessful. And at one point, and this is all happening without any authorization from Congress, which Congress supports him. And the idea was Adams had built this navy of, under 10 ships, and we ought to use it. And a quick show of force would be the way that we can enforce the treaties or eliminate a treaty and say, well, we had to go to war with you, and we're not going to pay the tribute, and have our families in New England and other parts of the nation have to pay these ransoms. So in one of these attempted chasing of the Barbary corsairs, that's the term they use for the pirates there, an American warship, the Philadelphia, ran aground, and the crew was actually captured. They couldn't get the ship off the sandbar. This is a warship. This is not a commercial unarmed ship. And it was the Pasha Yusuf, who's in charge of Tripoli at the time, demands $1.7 million from the United States, which is more than the entire military budget of the United States, and a significant amount of money, almost as much as the entire budget of the United States in 1803. So the Philadelphia is captured, their crew taken off. Now they are, suffering in prison in northern Africa. And so the commander of the American forces there says, the worst thing that can happen now is that those loyal to Pasha Yusuf can use the Philadelphia. They can get it off the sandbar. This is a frontline, state-of-the-art American warship. It would be like an enemy of the United States. Okay, we don't have them anymore, but getting a missile cruiser, or back before they were still being used, a battleship, because that's the equivalent of what the Philadelphia is. So their crews could use it and turn it against other nations, or worse, the United States. So they organize an evening, nighttime raid to storm the Philadelphia. And if they can't get it off the sandbar to recapture it, they destroy it, which is what they do. They burn the Philadelphia to the ground so that no one can use it. That way it couldn't be taken by Pasha Yusuf's forces. So things aren't going well. At least this is something of an embarrassment, but at least the ship doesn't fall into American hands. Jefferson in 1805 then sends another squadron to blockade Tripoli. So again, the major port of, in this case, Tripoli itself, is going to be threatened. He also plans a raid to actually storm and free the Americans who have been captured off the ships and the crew of the Philadelphia. And so the man who's going to lead this effort, I think I have him in the other slideshow, so let's take a look at that. I think I've got Preble's. Yeah, here's Edward Preble. Again, this experience in the Barbary states, I mean, the quasi-war prepared the Navy for this. The Tripoli War prepared the American Navy for 1812. I mean, we have some victories against the English, which are a complete shock and total embarrassment to the English. They can't believe that American ships actually bested their own. But it's Preble. It's Preble's boys, as they're called. These are the junior officers who become senior officers at the time of the War of 1812. So it is not Preble, but it's this gentleman. This is William Eaton. William Eaton is the former consul to Tunis. And if the blockade and bombarding Tripoli doesn't work, they're going to do something else. So it is this guy, Eaton. And this is one of those stories that we don't know much about, but it's worth telling. He organizes a group of mercenaries, basically out of Alexandria in Egypt. He also is aware, and this is American foreign intrigue at its best, the Pasha's brother, Hamid, had been exiled by the man in charge of Tripoli. So the Americans see an opportunity here. All right, let's get him out of exile. Let's put him in, remove the Pasha who's developing or demanding all of these bribes have to be paid. And so we have an army, a motley crew army, if there ever was one, of Greeks, Albanians, mercenaries, and a small contingent of the United States Marines who seize the port of Derna on the eastern edge of the nation of Tripoli. And then they march further towards the Americans who are held captive. And that's when, in this case, Pasha Yusuf basically leaves, abdicates, turns it over to his brother. And the new Pasha, Hamid, decides to sign a treaty with the United States, maintaining the treaty, not the new bribe that has to be taken place. The Americans actually do pay the ransom to the soldiers or some of the sailors who were involved. It's a sign of good faith, but they turn over the sailors who were actually captured by the Philadelphia. So they're freed. A lot of other Europeans are freed. The Americans get Italian ships and aid in the whole process of southern Italy. Italy isn't unified back then, so it probably would have been the Kingdom of Naples that came to the aid of the United States. But it's just enough of a, again, you can read a lot more into this as far as stories and histories written about it. It's really amazing. And then for all his trouble, William Eaton kind of has a falling out with President Jefferson and really dies kind of a penniless pauper. Politically, he's kind of blacklisted, and it's a shame. It happens to some people who make some really amazing decisions. And I mean, the march through the desert, they go, this is like Lawrence of Arabia stuff. I mean, really, before there was Lawrence of Arabia, you've got William Eaton taking this band of folks from different backgrounds all the way across from effectively Egypt to the eastern edge of Tripoli, and then by the threat of this army marching on, Pasha Yusuf, he leaves, and they put his brother in. So it's a great example of Americans saying, the government that we're dealing with, we can't work with, let's put in someone else. Now, is this guy Hammond any better? No, but you know, he's ours, and we can maybe control him. And there you have it. There you have it. It's a great story of intrigue. It, of course, gives the U.S. Marine Corps one of its leading lines in their hymn, really, from the halls of Montezuma. What's that referring to? Mexico, the Mexico War, 1846. To the shores, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. Again, it's 6 or 8 Marines total, but hey, they're there on the shores of Tripoli, and there you have it, a successful operation. Not the last time we will be involved. Later on, it's going to be against Algiers, and President Madison's going to have to deal with it. The difference is the American Navy is far more experienced in 1815 than we were in 1804 and 1805.
So Tripoli was its own country?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the Pasha, was he the leader of the entirety of Tripoli or just the Barbary Pirates?
Tripoli. Mm-hmm. And in fact, this will throw a lot of people. The first commercial treaty that the United States signs after independence is with Tunis. Now that's a piece of trivia that I bet not a lot of people would actually guess successfully.
And that's its own separate country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, tiny. Let me pull back up the other slide so we can take a look at that. Yeah, right there. Tunisia, but back then it was called Tunis, Tunis. So this is now French Morocco. Obviously, it's changed hands. Tripoli is now Libya and Egypt. But this was, again, this map shows you what happened. This is storming Derna was what the first move of Eaton and those who were following them, and then they were going to move all the way across Tripoli itself towards the border with Tunisia, and that's when the writing was on the wall as far as Pasha Youssef was concerned, and he's out of there. So it's a temporary military operation that's going to get better long-term results than continuing to pay the bribes. Now, really, at the end, we continue to pay the bribes, but not at the high rate that the Pasha had demanded. You got to pick your battles. You got to pick your battles.
When did we start the process of not negotiating with terrorists? Because these are technically terrorists, right?
No, this was,
It's like,
okay, but the terrorists, you can say, don't have a particular a state, right?
okay.
All right, they're not. These are legitimate, well-established countries, and this is their national policy that goes back hundreds of years, and they were good at it. And the European nations knew they were good at it, and so they said, look, if you're the English or the French, you're fighting each other, this is an unwanted distraction. We might just want to pay off the bribe. And it was early, I think, in Washington's term, $80,000, which is a significant amount back then. It's chump change now, obviously, but it's money, and it's not all about the money. It's about the principle of it. And people were writing a lot of things in without any sense of irony, right? This idea that how could these barbarian heathens enslave Christians? It's like, well, how could Christians enslave? well, we won't go there. This wasn't lost on some people. Benjamin Franklin made some really interesting observations about this in his lifetime. Saying that we won't stand for this kind of people being enslaved or imprisoned, but at the same time, we kind of will in other areas. So yeah, there's that. Okay, I have notes here, and I don't know if they're in the written notes, but I'll go through them very quickly. I wanted to say a couple of things about, and this is the whole theme of things you may not know much about in the time of Jefferson in office. Okay, it doesn't look like I have written down notes, but stick with me here on this, because I want to talk briefly about Marbury versus Madison. It's one of the most important Supreme Court cases, and I'll go through very quickly some of the details of it. It connects by what we talked about with Adams in office, this whole midnight appointment idea, the principle that once Adams knew that he lost, it was either going to be Burr or Jefferson, that he started signing into law judges at the different courts, the appeals courts and in the Supreme Court. And in 1803, one of those appointments, it was decided in this case, William Marbury, this is one of the litigants of the case, and the case is decided in 1803. William Marbury was a midnight appointment. He was a justice of the peace for the District of Columbia. So we know a little bit about the case, but these are some of the details. So the commission was never delivered. I mean, that particular position where he would get the official notice of and spell out this is your job now was not delivered by the Secretary of State, James Madison. And Marbury asks for a writ of mandamus, which essentially says, deliver the commission to me. I got the appointment fair and square. And Madison refused. And so Marbury, this is where the Madison comes in. It is James Madison. William Marbury versus James Madison. With a new Chief Justice of the United States, John Marshall, deliver the writ of mandamus, which orders Madison to give Marbury his commission. This is the unknown in the case as it made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. Well, it is actually Marshall who's very careful with the decision. He is a distant cousin of Thomas Jefferson. Cue the dun, dun, dun. Politically, they couldn't be farther apart.
Really?
What's that?
They were really related?
Yeah, because their paths are going to cross over the Burr treason trial again later.
Marbury or Marshall?
John Marshall is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He's a Virginian, and I don't know how it's through marriage, but they're actually distant cousins. So that makes it a little more awkward. But, you know, more awkward things have happened. We've done DNA to prove that Dick Cheney and Barack Obama have a way, way, way back common ancestor.
Wait, really?
Yes.
That's amazing.
And then now cue that "It's a Small, Small World" song. Yeah, it's true. It's true. Dick Cheney was like, wow, you know, Dick Cheney in true Dick Cheney fashion was like, wow, how about that? And Obama was like, well, you know, you can't pick your family, you know, he said something like that. And they both had these quotes about, yeah, okay, how about that? Yeah. Anyway, so getting off track as usual. But so I think what Marshall's dilemma is prove the independence of the Supreme Court while not going out and directly challenging the executive branch. Marshall told poor Marbury, I can't, and in the court specifically, I'm writing the opinion for the court, cannot issue the order. So you're out of luck, buddy. But at the same time, Marshall says, Section 13 of the 1789 Judiciary Act is unconstitutional because Congress tried to alter the court and they can't do that. It gets a little complicated legally, but basically what Marshall is doing is striking down a part of the Judiciary Act that the Congress passed in one of its first sessions. Marshall said, quote, a law repugnant to the Constitution is void. The courts are bound by that instrument, unquote. And the decision doesn't really make a big splash. You would think, oh my gosh, it's judicial review. It's the Supreme Court saying that a specific act of Congress is unconstitutional. But the court was effectively, if you look at the details of the case, limiting its own power. Mm-hmm. The court was saying, no, we're not going to make Madison deliver the writ to poor Mr. Marbury. The court, by the way, and if you think, oh, this opened up the Pandora's box of judicial review in the beginning of the 19th century, it's not true. The court would not strike down another part of the Constitution or question another law of Congress until 1857. Dred Scott, the Dred Scott decision, well, universally understood as one of the worst. I was going to say Plessy versus Ferguson is pretty awful too. It says segregation, as long as it is equal, is constitutional. But Dred Scott effectively said that Congress can't limit slavery in the territories, which was effectively striking down everything from the Missouri Compromise to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and even possibly the Northwest Ordinance, 1787. This did not leave judicial review in the hands of the court. Later decisions would. So everyone's like, oh, judicial review, it's established here in the court. Yeah, they won't really deal with it for another 50 odd years. And then later on, they'll apply the Bill of Rights to the states. And that really happens with the application of the 14th Amendment after the Civil War. So this is a reminder of something the court will try to do to flex its muscle. It's a reminder that the court remains independent and that federalism exists in the court. I mean, the Federalists don't win another election after 1796. I mean, they win elections at the state level. They win and have something of a revival prior to the War of 1812, but they don't win another presidential contest. But Marshall's on the court until what, 1835? I mean, 30 odd years he's on the court, and he casts a long shadow with the Federalist ideas and the supremacy of the federal government.
Isn't he known as the father of the Supreme Court?
Yeah, he's not the first. John Jay was the first, but he's certainly.
Jay are the two most influential still, I think.
Of Supreme Court Chief Justices, I wouldn't count John Jay up there. I mean, being first is important, but I think there are others. Yeah. The Warren Court is important. Our former president, Taft, you know, the only president who served on the Supreme Court after they became president. And really, that's the job Taft wanted. I mean, you know, he runs for re-election and he has this quote. He says, I may as well face the fact that I'm not going to win. Just not enough people like me in this country. Well, when you're running against Wilson and TR, and Eugene Debs, the socialist, it's kind of difficult. But he was a great Chief Justice. He was a guy who would get people, the justices, in a room, and he could work out the compromise and the opinion. And maybe he wasn't great as president, but he really found his job successfully in that area afterwards. Yeah, so yeah, there are a lot of. I mean, you could say that he was the man who wrote the opinion for Dred Scott. So the Taney Court was important, you know, for not great reasons, nevertheless. Okay, where are we now? Ah, yes, we're going to go to the real treason. Sorry? No. Roger Taney, Taney. It looks like Taney, I believe it's pronounced Tawney, Marylander and a slave owner. Okay, so yeah, the court in 1857 was the majority slave owners. Tawney, I believe, succeeded Marshall. He was appointed by Jackson, Andrew Jackson. Okay, the real treason of Aaron Burr. Let's talk a little bit about how we get to Weehawken in 1804. Among legendary shootouts in American history, only the gunfight at the OK Corral rivals what happened with Burr and Hamilton. The old high noon idea, the old stare down of two people on a street. They both pull a gun and the faster one wins. By the way, we think that happened one time, ever. Everything you see in the Westerns. Bill Hickok was the person who shot a man down in the street. And that's the only time we think it ever happened. How it became just required in every single story of the West or Western, where two guys steer down the street and pull their gun and whoever's faster wins. Entertainment value. Yeah, it looks fantastic. Hopefully the good guy wins, but it really never happened that way, because in the West, most people had their guns taken away the minute they came into town. You know, they practiced gun control back then because they didn't want lawless people running around shooting each other, especially when you were filled with alcohol. So back to Burr and Hamilton. Burr and Hamilton meet on the Weehawken Plain in New Jersey, with literally the city of New York in sight. Why are they in New Jersey? Because it is illegal to duel in New York. Carries a pretty stiff penalty with a fine. Burr is a lifelong follower of what we might call Lord Chesterfield's rule. And I'll explain what that means. If you're going to do as you please, do it with style. Burr had been useful, as the notes indicate, in helping New York enter the Republican column in 1796 too, but 1800 sealed it for Jefferson and Burr. Then he gets in trouble with Jefferson for never doing what apparently every historian and contemporary thought he should have done, which is step back and understand that Jefferson is supposed to be the top man of the ticket and I'm supposed to be vice president.
I wouldn't step down.
Okay.
I mean, it's his chance to become president, so I'm
Yeah. Well, if there is an understanding that you were chosen by the caucus of your own party members, that was going to be your role, and you defied it, you know, you're taking a chance. You're taking a risk.
True.
But hey, this is as close as I'm ever gonna. It's as close as I'm ever gonna get.
Just let's take the chance.
Exactly. The Lord Chesterfield rule: do as you please, but do it with style. He is, not surprisingly, Burr, told that he will not be nominated in 1804 as the vice presidential candidate once again. So he has to seek another career path. He runs for governor of New York as a Federalist. Loses badly. Why? Alexander Hamilton once again engages in a one-man campaign to make sure that the people of New York do not support Aaron Burr as governor. And Burr singles out Hamilton as the man who is single-handedly responsible for his defeat. Burr has an impressive lineage. His grandfather is Jonathan Edwards, the Great Awakening leader, the religious revivals of the 1730s. Jonathan Edwards. What's that?
They didn't teach you that in school when you learned about the Great Revivals.
Did you listen to Hamilton?
No.
Did they mention that?
My He says my grandfather was a hellfire and brimstone preacher.
Oh.
That's who's talking about.
Let me remind you of a Jonathan Edwards sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Every English anthology you pick up if you are a college student probably has that somewhere in there. Northampton, Massachusetts in the 1730s. Great Awakening lasted several decades, but Edwards should be given credit for lighting the fires in the Congregational Church. Hamilton had been out of power since leaving George Washington's cabinet in 1794. We know the reason why. Personal scandal. He cleared his name, at least publicly. Privately, well, he had to admit to that affair. He had, and by 1804, carried the honorary designation General Hamilton from his time commanding the new army, which was a joke on paper as it was a joke in reality. There was going to be no new army taking the field because, as John Adams said in that clip, I don't think I got to play it for you, but he's telling off Hamilton saying, we're just as likely to see French troops in North America as we are on the moon. Later on saying, Adams about Hamilton, never did I hear a man so unhinged and speak in with such crazy ideas of what Hamilton was going to do with the army. Use it maybe to detach. Maybe Hamilton was ahead of his time, because that's what we are hypothesizing Burr was going to do. Break Mexico free from Spain. Well, he was just 15 or so years early, because that's eventually what happened. Before the interview, as they call it, the duel, Hamilton drafted a personal statement. He drafted a will and what he hoped would take place, and also he said, I have no ill will to Colonel Burr.
Oh, he's demoted now.
No, that's the highest rank he got. And he's referring to his Colonel Burr.
Okay.
Yeah, that's okay. No, that was his rank. And they were both together. Sometime we know their paths crossed in the New York campaign.
Weren't they friends at one?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they practiced law together, sometimes on opposite sides of a case. It would be Hamilton representing a loyalist and Burr representing, there are books about, the legal careers of Hamilton and Burr. Sometimes they'd be on the same side of a case. But during the campaign, again, referring to the notes, Hamilton called Burr a dangerous man. He used that again both times, I should say, in 1801 and in 1804 over the New York gubernatorial campaign. And then, this is the part that we've hypothesized about ever since. And in one letter he said, I have a still more despicable opinion of Burr. We don't know what that means. Well, the author, the novelist I mentioned last time, Gore Vidal, has his own theory. It's that Hamilton knew that Burr and his daughter were carrying on an incestuous relationship. There is no historical proof that this is true. This is a novelist who doesn't have to have footnotes or endnotes. Put it in his book, and I highly recommend Burr and Lincoln and Empire and Gore Vidal. They're well written, and it's okay to knock these folks down a peg and humanize them a little bit more. No one in the historical community, I believe, that I've come across buys that theory. But that quote is true, a still more despicable opinion. Hamilton never distanced himself from this comment. Burr demands a complete and total disavowal for any insult that Hamilton put upon him. Hamilton doesn't. He doesn't retract it. He doesn't deny it. He's approached, did you say this? Yes. Retract it. No. Issue an apology. I won't. And that fast tracks you to a duel. And by the way, duels happen. I mean, Hamilton was involved in how many? 8, 10?
They're like 10.
Yeah, and what happens often in a duel, right? You challenge each other to a duel, you accept, and then somebody backs down. Or you actually make it to the area where you're going to have the duel, and you look across and say, are we really going to do this? I mean,
a discussion before the duel actually took place to see if they could come to a compromise.
You have intermediaries who are friends, associates on either side. Burr and Hamilton would have had them before this all took place. And you may have actually shown up with the weapons there, whatever you chose, slingshot, shotguns, swords, pistols, rocks, whatever you chose. The person who was challenged, in this case Hamilton, got to choose the weapon.
Why did he choose draw?
Because I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there that you could have any. You could easily, yeah, maybe that would have been paper airplanes. We'll throw them at each other and see. So what's that? So what happens when you get there and you look across and say, wow, you showed up, and the other guy says, wow, you showed up too, and yeah, we're not going to do this, are we? And then maybe shake hands and have a drink and say, look, this got out of hand real fast. This accelerated to a degree that I'm not comfortable with, and you go off. Honor is served, right? You both showed up. You were going to do this. Or maybe you loaded the pistols and you're like, yeah, I don't think so. And you can stop. And once again, honor is served on each side. So back to this idea of what Hamilton was going to do before the duel. He also suggests that he would reserve and throw away his first fire, meaning you can fire in the air, you can fire in the ground, you can fire at a passing chipmunk, whatever you want to do. And then see what Burr did. Burr now had the option of leveling the pistol and shooting Hamilton, or doing the same thing. Now, if they're both satisfied at that point, the duel would be over. If instead you want to actually say, nope, I'm going to go through with this again, you could reload. There's a couple of good duel scenes in the Stanley Kubrick movie, Barry Lyndon, which is, I know everyone knows Kubrick with 2001, and if you're anything into movies, but it's a movie that was made in the 70s. It's beautifully shot. It's beautifully filmed. Anyway, yeah, that happens to this poor guy. The guy, he fires it in the ground. The other guy fires at him. He's like, oh, that wasn't supposed to happen that way. But it turns out it did. So they arrive in Weehawken at 7 in the morning with two what they call seconds. That's their assistant that goes with them. The seconds will sometimes negotiate and intervene and try to make this interview end happily, maybe even peacefully. They also showed up with a doctor, just in case. And so they go through the motions of the code duello, as they called it. The code, of course, of dueling. The oarsmen are supposed to be to row them over from New York into New Jersey, are supposed to be away, and if they ask them who was there later on, they have plausible denier. I don't know, I didn't see, I just rowed him over. If they're looking for witnesses to arrest the people who were involved in the duel. And the whole thing doesn't work that you back to back march off 10 paces with the pistol up in the air. The seconds would measure out the distance. And they would say, you, Colonel Burr, are here, you, General Hamilton, are over here. And they would say, okay, that's how it's going to work. Hamilton was the challenged in this. And he had the choice of weapons. And he chose two custom-made single-shot pistols. They had been used, and this is a macabre decision by Hamilton. They had been used, these pistols, in two previous duels. You all know this story, right?
Yep.
Including the duel where his son died. Why in the world? Yeah.
It was like 2 weeks before or something.
Yeah, pretty recently. So these are single shot. Again, you have to load it. It takes 30 seconds, a minute to load this thing. You've got to pour the powder, and you have a solid lead ball, not a bullet. It's not a steel-jacketed modern ammunition here we're talking about. And then when you fire it, you got to reload it because you only have one shot. It's a flintlock pistol. The flint hits the metal, causes a spark. The spark goes into the gunpowder goes into the back of the gun. A lot of things can go wrong. This is why flintlock muskets and pistols and that warfare was, again, only done under ideal conditions. It also, in this case, these pistols had a hair trigger, requiring only apparently 1 pound of pressure to work. Exerting 1 pound of pressure on your trigger finger to squeeze, because you're supposed to squeeze and not pull the trigger, jerk the gun that way. Everyone tells you that when you shoot a gun. What happens next is shrouded in mystery. It's one of those top 5 places you'd like to see in maybe American history. I've been that witness behind the grassy knoll, or the grassy knoll with the Kennedy assassination, maybe another place you would like to have seen. Yeah, right. Where's the other shooter, if there actually is another one? Both men fire the guns, we know that. Hamilton is hit in the right side. The bullet, not really bullet is accurate, it's a lead ball. It travels at a slow speed, and when that lead ball hits muscle and sinew and bone and flesh, it flattens. So imagine a silver dollar now beginning to tumble through your body.
I'd rather break apart.
It literally, that's why in Civil War battles they amputate it. What that bullet, now that was a bullet, not a ball, but it would still flatten because it was traveling at a slow speed, and it wouldn't make a nice clean, break of your bone. It would, everybody awake now? It would go into your body, and it would just travel slowly. It would crush and annihilate bone. So they couldn't, let's reset your broken bone because the bullet passed through your arm. Your arm bone was gone. And so they sawed it up, cut you, and then fixed all that. So this projectile would have gone in his side and gone across the inside of his body and lodged in his spine, immediately probably making him paralyzed. He crumbles to the ground in a heap. He knows, one of the first things he says is that the wound is fatal. Burr tries to move towards Hamilton. The eyewitness accounts here. He wants to talk to him. He wants to check on him. Again, the whole firing order. I mean, their shirts printed, right? Hamilton fired first, or there's a sign on my office door that says, "What would Aaron Burr do?" It's just, who knows? We maybe Burr shot first, and the reaction when you're hit with a bullet is you're able to exert a pound of pressure on the gun, and you fire too. You're shot, and you fire the gun up in the air. And some people said he hit a tree limb with the bullet because he had no intention of firing at Burr. But each side has its own version of events, and somewhere there is the truth, but we still do not know about it. The overwhelming popular consensus is that Burr murdered Hamilton in cold blood.
No.
You got to control the narrative. That's what the Hamilton people did. The anti-Burr people, the papers, by the way, Hamilton dies the next day in agony, rode back across into New York, has to find a minister who will actually give him the last rites, because the first one says, "How did you get injured in a duel?" "Oh, I'm out of here." The minister said and left, and they brought someone else. They brought the wife and kids in. He was conscious, but in a lot of pain and probably paralyzed from the legs down because that bullet would have severed part of his spine. And he dies. It's July 1804 at this point. The anti-Burr papers talk of Burr wearing a bulletproof suit to the duel, drinking toast ahead of time in New York, celebrating that Burr was going to gun down Hamilton. True? Nope. But that's what the anti-Burr papers did. Wax replications, wax museums at the time, that was all the rage, right? Of the duel depicts Hamilton shot by Burr and hidden accomplices that Burr had around him. So we have a grassy knoll theory, even for the Hamilton-Burr duel. Even if Burr had missed, it's okay. He had another guy waiting in the wings to pop up and shoot Hamilton from the side, unbeknownst to Hamilton, who at this point never had a chance. Someone was going to shoot him. Burr heads out of town. Now let's go back just a second and remind all of you of something. Aaron Burr is the sitting vice president of the United States when this happens. Okay? He's not going to be on the ticket in 1804, but the election hadn't happened yet. Election between Jefferson and, you know what? I don't even know who the hell the Federalist who ran against him was, because it was such an overwhelming re-election success for Jefferson. Truly, I don't really, one of the Pinckneys maybe, I'm not sure. But I mean, what's that? No, Madison stays the whole 8 years, 2 terms as Secretary of State. I think it was, oh gosh, not William Tompkins. I think he was Madison. Maybe Clinton, one of the Clintons from New York, not the other Clintons from later on. No relation as far as I know, but the Clinton family, very connected in revolutionary New York, and it might have been him in his second term. I have to go back and check. You know, vice presidents should be known. They're not always known. And definitely candidates should be known, but I cannot, if you made me really come up with it, at all know who the Federalist candidate in 1804 was. Because, you know, in 1804, what does Jefferson have to run on? I've repealed all the taxes. We're not fighting anybody. And, oh yeah, just made the greatest, sweetest land deal in world history, you know, up to the Alaska Purchase, which a student one time reminded me that per acre, what was it, 3 cents an acre, $15 million, 3 cents an acre. Yeah, it was something like that, $3 an acre or 3 cents an acre, whatever the Louisiana Purchase was. Someone came up to me afterwards and said, I'm from Alaska, and I can tell you that if you divide the price by the amount of square miles of Alaska, it was even less in Alaska. I'm like, okay, thank you. I didn't realize that, but it is clearly one of the best land deals. So if you had political campaigns like we do, you would have stuck that on a bumper sticker. Peace, no taxes, Louisiana. And you know, no wonder the Federalist candidate in 1804 is entirely forgotten. So Burr heads out of town. He goes to Georgia. He's under indictment as the vice president from the state of New York for fighting the duel. There are sermons, of course, and all sorts of serious things that happen when Hamilton is buried. The newspapers call him the next Benedict Arnold, a traitor to the United States for gunning down Hamilton, the heroic leader of the Federalist Party. What's that?
But Hamilton also showed up and participated in a duel.
But he died.
It's always good to.
I know. Look. Burr would be, if he was here now, thrilled that you are standing up for him and give.
I hate the double standard. I mean,
Of course, yeah.
He's vilified
Yep.
because he shot someone in a duel, which is how some duels work. I mean,
Yeah.
It's not his fault that Hamilton decided to shoot up in the air. I mean, because he wrote it in the night.
Well, let's get back to the entire reason they assembled at Weehawken. Hamilton could have said, I print a retraction.
Yeah.
It was a political campaign. It got out of hand. And we would have had these two around longer in whatever role, I'm not sure. I mean, Hamilton is out of power and leading a political movement whose fortunes are declining and ebbing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even Hamilton, who said Jefferson should get no credit for the Louisiana Purchase, realized how important and significant it is. It really was. He knew that. He even knew that. So the missing ingredient of all of this story is the 4 to 5 seconds when the shots are fired. Both of the individuals that these gentlemen brought with them agree that the men conducted themselves like gentlemen. Okay, that's nice. But it seems as if Hamilton may have fired first and missed. Burr waits, maybe thinking Hamilton fired at him, and he shot Hamilton. There's no getting around that. That is what happened, the order of which we can still argue about. The odd development is that both had challenged each other to the duel, and a duel itself is quite rare. But the Burr-Hamilton duel is an exception on both counts, that anyone still had that happen. I mean, later on, Henry Clay would accept a duel. This is now in the 18 teens or 20s, and he was in politics as well. And everyone's like, what the hell? Dueling still happens? And it did. I mean, it basically was outlawed. It was a relic of the past as far as most of the northern states. But in the South, different code of honor. And continued. You had the Dueling Oaks there in New Orleans. So that was part of the regional differences. Maybe the duel is the exception to the rule, maybe a momentary breakdown, that for the most part in political divides, you can have non-violent conflict within the American Revolutionary generation. But I think it's significant about who does duel. Hamilton's last letter, of course, was a statement of what he hoped would take place if he was gone. There was talk in 1804 that if Jefferson was to win re-election, that maybe there'd be a secession movement of the New England states, because they see the writing on the wall. They see the permanent minority status of the Federalist Party and of New England in the nation, especially when we connect it to Louisiana. And there was even talk that if Burr had gotten to be elected governor of New York, he would, as a governor of New York, join New England and detach that section of the United States. It's exactly, yeah. I know, I see you there. I object. I object, Your Honor. And it's a good point. I mean, it further puts more ammunition or another few arrows in the quiver of people who really want to make Hamilton's death the ruin of Aaron Burr. Burr gives this amazing speech too. He presides over the last session of Congress as vice president, and then says, you know, I'm out of here. He goes to Europe. He leads the whatever in the world is going on in the West, detaching Mexico from Spain, raising an army in the West, dealing with some individuals in Ohio, going down the Ohio River, taking from Louisiana and maybe making an American army and invading Mexico itself, or attaching it to the United States or somewhere in the West. The issue, I think one of you may have said it in class, he told everybody you talk to a different story. So we are, at this point, unable to figure out what he really had in mind, what was part of the Burr conspiracy. We do know that his daughter and granddaughter, I think, or grandson, his daughter and her child died in a shipwreck in 1814 or 15. And with that went a lot of his personal correspondence, which, no, it's one of those, we would have maybe got more insight into Aaron Burr if we had found those letters. And then, basically stayed out of the country until the statute of limitations ran out on the indictment for dueling and for killing Hamilton.
So what was the statute of limitations back then?
I don't know, whatever it was, 15, 20 years, he basically outlived it.
Okay.
He remarried later in life. He married a wealthy widow and then ran around on her. And in his 80s is sued for divorce for infidelity from basically the sugar mama he married. I mean, that's what she was. She was a wealthy widow who had, I mean, why not? Let's use the expression. That's what she was. She was a wealthy widow and had connections, and that's what Burr was looking for at the time. And, he is who he is. And so she sues him for divorce, and the guy lives until the 1830s. He outlives almost all of the other founders. I think Madison's up there as well, living into the 1830s. But there he is, just a fascinating enigma. That's the only word that I can apply to Aaron Burr.
So as soon as it happened, he ran out of town. When did he come to Louisiana?
That was 1805. The Burr conspiracy starts, and that's after that is when he leaves for Europe, because he gets arrested somewhere in the Gulf South. I think it's actually in what's now Alabama. And my mentor at LSU used to say that, I mean, I don't know what evidence he had for this, but he used to say that federal marshals arrested Burr. And it was lucky for Burr, because if the Army actually captured Burr, Burr was going to be accidentally shot. I mean, I have air quotes now, Gregory, accidentally shot while trying to escape. Yeah, so federal marshals. What's that?
Is that because Hamilton was in general army time?
Hamilton was dead.
Well,
No.
I know, but I'm saying, but
Oh, okay.
before that,
Because
Okay.
Hamilton was such an important figure. That's why they wanted to kill him, because he killed Hamilton. right?
I'm not sure if that is the real reason, other than you have to know the whole story of the Burr conspiracy is that he's conspiring with the man who's in charge of the Army,
Oh.
James Wilkinson, who is an awful person. I mean, he had been, again, getting into the Burr conspiracy, and that's fine. Wilkinson was Agent 13 because he was he was literally the general of the Army that was going to be based in Louisiana once Jefferson divided Louisiana. He was also being paid and bribed by the Spanish to provide information about American moves in the West.
He's a double agent.
So, yes, he's a double agent.
Okay.
So James Wilkinson conspired with Burr, whatever they were going to plan together, and then sold Burr out.
Yeah, because Burr wanted, so you said, live right next to his bank like that?
Or whatever he told Wilkinson, whatever he told. I mean, he had
It's
run.
all speculation.
He had run-ins with Andrew Jackson, and Jackson says to members of the War Department, he's writing letters back to Washington, Burr, a guy that's from the East and I don't know much about, he's got some really interesting ideas. What, of course, Burr never tells Jackson is that he's doing this on his own. He is under no instructions, Burr, from the government of the United States to intrigue against the Spanish in the West. Burr never bothers to tell Jackson that. So Jackson's like, he has the full authority and the endorsement of the Jefferson administration. And the War Department is like, Burr is where? In this letter. And then another letter comes in, he's doing what? And that's why they put together kind of a file on him. And Jefferson says, okay, let's let this guy kind of hang himself. And when Wilkinson says, I can't believe what's happening, of course, he's in on it. But the plot, whatever it is getting out of hand. And this is Wilkinson's chance to save face.
We really don't know what it is.
No, no. Read that new book if you want, the giant one I brought in the other day, the Burr conspiracy. That would give you scenarios, and every historian since then has and Professor Eisenberg's is very good. Fallen Founder. It's sympathetic to Burr. I mean, he's been maligned. You should read it. I mean, you would very much now have more ammunition when people were like, Hamilton, yay, Burr, bad, and you'd be like, oh, wait a minute. You could go up there and truly get a different perspective. Yeah, I mean, there's two sides to every story. So Wilkinson sells out Burr, and Jefferson's like, oh my gosh, and we got to get this guy now and grab him. And they arrest him and they haul him back to basically the trial of the century before we had a trial of the century. Now every trial is a trial of the century, whether it be the Lindbergh case or whichever husband or wife killed their husband or wife, or the OJ or whatever else is a trial of the century. Well, the first trial of the century was Aaron Burr, former vice president, now on trial for treason. And you've got to love. I mean, they need a musical about this. Because in one corner is Thomas Jefferson, who's running the prosecution. And in this other corner is Aaron Burr, former vice president and accused of, basically treason against the United States. And presiding over it is John Marshall. Dun, 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 distant cousin of Thomas Jefferson. So Jefferson tries to run the prosecution. Yeah, it really is. And so he's trying to run the prosecution to get Burr convicted of treason. John Marshall comes in and says, all right, treason is really the only crime mentioned in the Constitution by name. So Marshall says, look, two things have to happen, jury, to convict Mr. Burr of treason. He has to organize it, and he has to commit an overt act against the United States. Jefferson, we can imagine, just absolutely head spins all the way around, exorcist style, on his neck, because he knows the minute that Marshall very narrowly defines treason, he'll never be found guilty, because he didn't do both parts. Oh, he had the planning stages of something, but committing an overt act against the United, nope, he didn't do that, because they really arrested him in the planning stage, and Burr is found not guilty. And that's when he heads out of the United States for a while. Stays there in Europe for a while and comes back and brings up his law practice again and, marries the wealthy widow and all that stuff. So, yeah. There it is, Aaron Burr. Fascinating individual. Ahead of his time, I think, on a lot of things. And it would have been very interesting to see if it held on and actually won the 1800. Again, what ifs are useless in some ways, but there's sometimes we can have fun with them. But that's a great what if. Yeah. So anyway, okay, it's about time we'll probably shut down for today. I wanted to talk about, and we will continue this next week, revisiting Louisiana, because one of the issues, because we live here and we should know more about this, is the challenge of bringing Louisiana in after 1803 and after 1804. It's one thing to lead a war of conquest against Native Americans in Ohio and then populate it with people who want to settle there. What if you have French, some Americans, Spanish, and African Americans who have different rules regulating slavery there in Louisiana? Someone in Massachusetts called Louisiana a great waste, a wilderness unpeopled by any beings except wolves and wandering Indians. Yeah, the deal was a disaster. We are to spend money of which we have too little for land of which we already have too much. Now that is an argument the Federalists and later the Whig Party will make. We can't expand too quickly. The institutions of the United States will weaken if we go like a comet into space, they say. I mean, into the wilderness, we're going at this speed by which we want to consider and should consider slowing things down. So it presents Jefferson with some problems, dealing with slavery, whether or not the slave trade can continue, and the overseas slave trade into Louisiana, who to put in charge there, who's this guy going to be in Louisiana? And then, of course, the divide between Orleans, what we recognize as modern Louisiana, and everything else, Louisiana, and what to do with that territory. And the word back then they used is incorporate. How do we incorporate Louisiana based on the population that's already there? These people aren't fit for regular style American government because they never had it. And that's why Louisiana takes what, 9 years from purchase to statehood. That's probably one of the main reasons.
And then also they had to, because of the Code Noir, because
Yep.
here